Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn webinar. I'm Elena Story. I'll just be chairing the program today, along with our Family Law Committee Chair, Wendy Meadows. We're excited to have Steve Shedlin here today on the topic of vocational rehabilitation in the time of COVID. Many of you may know Steve as having him as an expert in your case, or opposing counsel having him as an expert. He's the owner of Rehabilitation Experts of Maryland. He's going to give us a brief background of vocational rehabilitation and then talk about it in the context of this crazy time that we're living in and how COVID is affecting his opinions or the opinions of the judiciary. We can not see our participants. You guys can see us, but we can't see you or hear you. So if you have any questions, please use the chat function or the Q&A function. Wendy and I will be monitoring that and be able to interject those questions as Steve takes a break or anything. There's also a slideshow that you should have on your screen. So Rachel will be scrolling through that as well. Otherwise, general announcements, just look for any emails from Wendy coming up soon about any other events coming up in the winter. We'll be meeting about those soon to figure out the details, so just stay tuned. Again, I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Steve to take it away. Thanks, Steve. Steve, are you on mute? There you go.
Thank you very much. Oh, was I on mute?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. If I wasn't heard before, nice to be with you all today. It's an unusual thing for me to not be able to see you. I'm glad you can see me. I'm a big gesture person, but as I'm sitting down, we'll see how that goes. I'm looking forward to chatting with you and hearing any questions that you might have. If we could scroll to the first slide, please. To the next slide, please. Well, there we go. What I wanted to do is tell you a little bit about what a vocational assessment is. When you retain a vocational expert, or if the other side has retained one and they're being asked to interview your client. The basics are the same right now, regardless of the fact that we're in a pandemic and that things have changed as a result of COVID-19. But I'm still looking for the same information about an individual if I'm going to be rendering an opinion as to their ability to work and to earn. Of course, I want to know their educational background, how far they went in school, what they studied, how long it's been since they've been in school, and whether the things that they've learned are relevant in today's labor market, or whether their skills are stale because it's been an extended period of time since they were in school. So that's something that I'm looking at. And then really any kind of IT or computer skills that they may have developed either from their education or things that they're doing at home. Of course, their work history is very important. And I'm looking at what they've done as a paid participant in the labor market and how recently they've done it. Very often, vocational experts are asked to evaluate the backgrounds of individuals who may have been stay-at-home moms, sometimes even stay-at-home dads, but people who may not have been in the labor market for 5 years, 10 years, sometimes a bit longer. So also in looking at a person's work history, we're also looking at what types of volunteer things they may have done if they were out of the labor market. Were they homeschooling their kids? Were they providing any sort of teaching? If their kids were in school, what kind of volunteering were they doing? Was it real basic stuff like they were a room mom or a dad who chaperoned different trips? Or were they doing some things that might have been more substantive? Had they volunteered at their church and actually taught religious school? Had they been part of the PTA and served on a board? Had they done any bookkeeping functions, treasury functions? Were they the president of the organization and had to run meetings? So exactly what type of volunteer work they might have done if they've been out of the paid labor market, that can help in assessing certain transferable skills that they might have. Take a look at health issues, and while I'll deal with this a bit more later on in the presentation in terms of talking about how health issues may impact individuals regarding their ability to work during COVID-19, there's still something that I look at. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the background of a rehabilitation counselor, and I'll talk about mine quickly, but I'm not unique. I'm a graduate of an accredited rehabilitation counseling program, which means that I studied things about medical aspects of disability, psychological aspects of disability. So working with a person with a medical condition, whether it's physical, cognitive, psychological, is a routine part of the work that I do. So I routinely talk with doctors about what's going on with their patients. I routinely talk with therapists. I routinely review medical records. So that is something that I'm able to do as part of your case if the individual or the opposing party is alleging that they have some sort of health condition that's impacting upon their ability to work. I'm not a doctor or a therapist, so of course I can't give a diagnosis, I can't give a prognosis, but I can interpret what's going on with them and how that would impact their ability to perform work in the local labor market. So that's something that you can bring out through through utilizing a vocational expert. So I also try to take a look at whether the situation they're in is situational, particularly if they're alleging anxiety, depression, cognitive issues resulting from the fact that they're going through a divorce. Taking a look at medical records to see, did this pre-exist the divorce, or is this something that's been going on since they've been involved in litigation or since their separation? So I want to take a look at whether this may resolve at the time when the divorce is finalized, because that would have impact on their ability to work now, but also on their ability to work in the near future, and it might be different. I also want to look at the person's age, and while again, I'll talk about that a little bit more when I'm talking about COVID, their age is relevant. I think sometimes people are feeling really old when they're going through a divorce, particularly if they've been married for an extended period of time. I've often heard, who's going to want to hire 45-year-old me who hasn't been in the labor market for 10 years? And some employers do want a younger worker. Some employers, though, are looking at somebody who may be older and are looking for the maturity and the gravitas that they can bring to a job. And so it really has to do with the job search that the person is doing, putting in the time to look for work and to recognize that there may be employers who won't be interested in them on the basis of their age, but that other employers are recognizing that people are working longer now. The retirement age for someone who's in their 40s, 50s, even early 60s is 67 years old. So they can look at an extended period of work life expectancy and still be interested in someone who may be in their 40s or even their 50s. There does reach a time where age is impactful. It's harder for someone in their 60s to find new employment. But typically someone in their 40s and 50s with a good job search can find work. And that's one thing that I didn't put on this slide, but I will touch on briefly. I also take a look at the person's job search. It doesn't matter if they come in with a stack of 60 or 70 jobs that they've applied for online over a 6 or 7 month period of time. That's really not that relevant to me if that's all they've done is just look for work online. If they haven't done something to separate themselves from the pack or really do as close to a full-time job search as they can, beginning to look for work on Monday morning and stop their job search on Friday afternoon, particularly if they're not working, and they should theoretically have the time to conduct that type of job search. That's an important thing to look at too. So I really try to see, what has the effort been? What have they done to look for work? And that is something that the judges tend to listen to when I explain to them, the effort that was involved, that the person has made in finding work. We can just flip to the next slide, please. So something that hasn't changed in the time of COVID is that it really doesn't matter what your clients tell me regarding themselves or regarding their spouses that much, other than if they can provide an accurate history. I don't care that you may have a client who says that he pays his secretary a lot of money and that his wife should be able to make that much because he knows that that's what they make in his office, or that he knows someone who makes $80,000 who works as a receptionist. Well, maybe he does, but that doesn't matter. I'm also not interested in hearing that the opposing party, could sell ice to Eskimos, that they're so great and that everybody's going to listen to them. I need to evaluate this myself. I'm certainly willing to listen to everybody's client, to give them their time to tell me what they think their spouse is capable of performing. But regardless of that, I still have my opinions. I had someone recently in a case in Montgomery County whose wife was receiving Social Security disability, just wanted to tell me about all the vacations that they had taken where she was hiking. And, that was great. That shows that if she gets a job, as someone who's on vacation and is hiking, maybe she can do that. But I didn't know really how transferable that would be, considering that the Social Security Administration had found her to be totally disabled. Next slide, please. So yeah, what we think we know is the one I wanted to look at. So here are things, that I think that we're still kind of thinking about. We know we're in a pandemic. I think we have a sense that that things are tougher, but still, sometimes, we're hearing a lot, certainly from the administration, that the stock market is great, and so things are good that way. That almost everyone can work remotely, and of course, we have basically found that in our occupations as attorneys, for me as a rehabilitation counselor, that working remotely has been something that works for us. That the unemployment rate has dropped significantly since March, April, and May, and it has, for what it's worth. It's still much, much higher than before the pandemic, almost double what it was before the pandemic. And, we're thinking about that there's great news about vaccines. And, like everyone, I'm certainly hoping that will happen, but we don't know how quickly the vaccines will be ready for distribution to the population at large. So we really don't have a sense yet as to when things are going to improve, when they're going to get better, so that the labor market might look like it looked prior to COVID. Next slide, please. But here are things that we really are finding out. The attitude of how people feel about work, particularly with employers, has a great deal to do with how much will be available, how many jobs will be available. If employers think that things are going to be good down the road, then they tend to be hiring. If employers are afraid that things are going to stay the same or that they might get worse, then they may not be hiring, or they might even be laying off. And as recently as September, 57% of people believed that there was going to be improvement in the labor market. The following month, October, that it already dropped to 51%. And I'm supposing that in November, we'll find that even fewer people are thinking that, as we're seeing COVID numbers climb throughout the country and in Maryland. And we have Governor Hogan and different county executives making things more restrictive. So if people are fearful as to what's going on in the labor market, it will likely contract. And I would expect that before it expands again, that it's going to contract. So people's attitudes about it, again, does have a bearing on unemployment. Next slide, please. So people are really seeing that they believe that there'll be a prolonged and insufficient recovery, or a muted recovery. There's a feeling that even as things get better, that we don't know when it will get back to the way it looked in February and in March. That even as things get better and more people may be returning to work or jobs may be expanding, will everybody be hired back? Will everybody be able to work full time? And a lot of it depends on the occupation. Just to give an example, if someone was looking for a car, and they may have been fearful of going into a dealership when things were at their worst, and they didn't really want to order a car online because they wanted to test drive it and such, they may put off their decision. And but yet at some point they'll buy a car, and it could catch up. The people who needed cars will probably get cars. The people who need cars will probably get cars. So while there may have been a big dip, the auto industry should be able to come back. But an example of something that people need, if they need a manicure or a pedicure, or if they need a haircut and they put that off, they're not going to get the 10 manicures and mani-pedis that they missed during that period of time. They're not going to get the 10 haircuts that they missed. So while they may start getting haircuts again, and they may start getting, a mani-pedi, that type of thing, the employers who would have been providing those services didn't, and they may go out of business. So they may not be able to recover. We're seeing the same things in the food industry and such, and in the hotel industry. People who would have stayed in a hotel may be staying in one again, but the hotels that didn't have enough volume may be closing. We're seeing restaurants that were very successful close. I was reading about in Montgomery County that a restaurant that had been quite successful in Bethesda, when they were reduced to 50%, they had their landlord working with them and charging them less rent. But now that Montgomery County had cut back to 25%, they can't make it on 40 people a night in the restaurant. And so they've had to go out of business. And they had been successful before. It's unlikely that they will be able to resume. So that's what happens with employers in some areas. They're not going to be able to resume business. And as such, even as things get better, there may be a narrower sphere of jobs that are available. Now, when I'm working on cases with folks like you, I'm seldom seeing restaurant workers and hotel workers. Usually the reasons that attorneys are getting me involved are bigger dollars are involved, looking for people who can do more and who can earn more. I'm assuming that you may still see cases like that, even if you're not referring it out for a vocational opinion. So it will be important to look at what types of occupations will be available. And those that are in the service industry are really going to be hurting. So next slide. So even with the recovery, there's been a tremendous drop. And so we're seeing things like leisure and hospitality are down almost 70%. The food service industry has been down almost 65%, and that's probably still going to be dropping. Construction and such is down almost 60%. And that really has to do not only with somebody who's just a construction worker, but you might have people who are in construction occupations that they've been construction managers or supervisors, or people who have been in white collar jobs in those types of industries. And those are dropping. And then the winter months, they tend to drop anyway. So that's a problematic occupation. In retail, that's also dropped and likely will continue to do so. Again, there have been further restrictions as COVID has hit its third wave, and fewer people are being allowed to actually be in the brick and mortar stores. So that's hurting retail. And now this is an area that I'm often looking at when I'm taking a look at someone who's been out of the labor market for a while. People whose job skills may be stale from having been a stay-at-home parent for 10 years or so, who maybe have some college. Areas in which they would typically have been able to work in the past would have been as a retail salesperson, maybe even as a retail supervisor, and those jobs really are not going to be there for a while. So that does limit the people who have a lesser work history, a less recent work history. Those people are going to have difficulty. And the other issue that we're seeing is it's not also always that there are closures and layoffs, although we are seeing closures and layoffs, but it's the lack of full-time employment that sometimes employers are trying to keep their people working, but they can't keep them all working full-time the way they were. So what they may be looking at is hiring more part-time people. And if they hire people part-time, they're paying less benefits and such. So that's another factor. Looking for full-time employment for individuals becomes more difficult. Again, it depends upon the type of occupation in which they're working. So next slide, please. But there are companies that are hiring, and ones that you would probably expect. Shipping and delivery companies are hiring, like Amazon. And I don't know if anybody has been on the interstates in recent weeks and months, but I've never seen more UPS trucks and FedEx trucks and other Amazon trucks and other types of delivery trucks. Those companies are doing well. So people who are involved in the customer service aspects of it, the actual packing and things, the whether it's a white collar or a blue collar job, those are working pretty well. Online learning companies, particularly as some children are going to school in the brick and mortar school, some are still learning remotely, some are doing a hybrid service, a hybrid system, but many parents are feeling that that children are not learning as well, in this setting. So they have gone to using online learning companies and tutoring and such. So whereas tutoring used to be an occupation that really didn't net that much money for an individual, it's grown quite a bit. There's a greater need for tutors, as well as individuals who might be interested in picking up some college classes. More and more classes can be done at the community college level, and even at the four-year college level can be done online. And so those programs are picking up. So two things. One is if someone needs the training, your clients can get that training in an online setting. And also, if someone is looking for work and they have the IT skills, that's a good occupation. And it's also good for someone to learn those IT skills and take those classes online, take classes in Microsoft products and such, so that they would be able to work in those areas. Of course, grocery stores and delivery services are doing well. People still need groceries. Some people are still willing to go to groceries. That ebbs and flows, of course, as the virus grows in number and diminishes in numbers. But people do need that, and so there's people still doing delivery and such. Again, probably most of your clients wouldn't be involved in that because they're probably involved in occupations in which they could earn more. But yet, those are jobs that people can pick up. I had a case in Anne Arundel County where a woman was an esthetician, and people just didn't want to come in. They didn't want to have her providing skincare to them on a direct basis. She needed to make money, so she got a job at a giant, and she was hired immediately. If someone is willing to, or feels that they're able to expose themselves to the public, being able to work in a grocery store is an occupation that can be found, not always on a full-time basis, but those jobs are readily available. A person can be hired in that area almost immediately. And then remote meetings and communications companies. People who are holding meetings such as this are still able to do well. I had a case where a fellow had put together a business where he was a broker between the federal government employees coming in and receiving continuing education. And then he made his money by selling to IBM and other sponsors who wanted to sell product to the federal government. His company did slip for a while, and it was problematic when he couldn't have the in-person meetings. But he was able to develop an online business, which hasn't been quite as successful, but which was something that he was able to do and still have earnings. He adapted to what was going on as a result of COVID. Next slide, please. And then quickly to the next one. What does this mean for your case? Okay. Next, please. So now let's take a look at what's going on with the person that's being evaluated, whether they're your client or whether they're the opposing party. Their age does become an issue in terms of just age being an issue, which makes somebody more susceptible to COVID. I'm not the one who can make that judgment, but we are aware that older people are the ones who become sicker, that the morbidity from COVID does affect those that are older. So people who are older and are fearful of being in the labor market or fearful of being in a brick and mortar type of place is something that needs to be taken into consideration now. And I will tell you that my experience, because I have testified at trials remotely, judges are taking judicial notice of that, of how old the individuals are and what that might mean. And also taking a look at what their health is. There have been issues that people have had with health that really have not been, it's important to them, of course, we want everyone to be healthy, but it hasn't been that important in looking at a case. If someone had asthma or diabetes, or if they were obese, if they had heart issues, pulmonary issues, oftentimes they were able to function in the labor market. Maybe they were taking medication for their asthma, medication for their diabetes, and really they were able to function. I have asthma, and I'm borderline diabetic, and I've not worried about it for years, but now I do. Now I am fearful that I don't want to get COVID because it could be worse for me than it might be for someone else. So we really have to take this type of thing in consideration in looking at what type of work a person can do. This type of person probably is better suited to work remotely if we can figure out what kind of remote job they can do. And then there are issues with what are health issues with others in the household. Even if they're not afraid something bad might happen to themselves, are they living with an elderly parent, or are they dealing with an elderly parent? Do they have a child that might have some sort of precondition that they're afraid to possibly bring COVID back to them? Something that I've not given thought to in the past about older parents, younger children who have conditions, are something that needs to be taken in consideration because the judges are taking it into consideration. So as an example, I had a fellow who was undergoing chemo. Unfortunately, I didn't find out he was undergoing chemo until the trial, but the judge did take notice of that and asked my opinion as to whether this person should be out there and be exposed to the risk of COVID. And I had to concede that someone who was undergoing chemo, that likely was not a great idea, at least during that period of time, and that could be reevaluated when the protocols had been completed and to see what their oncologist said. Next slide, please. So still, it's important to look at the person's work history. Are they working in any capacity now? This is always important because people who are working, even if you think that they may be underemployed, they're more apt to be able to find another job because they're already in the labor market. So I want to look at what are they doing, and does the job lend itself towards being done remotely, or is it something that they do have to wait and they can only do it in a brick and mortar place? Or even if they can't do their job remotely, do they have skills from that job that lend itself to working remotely somewhere else? And so I want to know, have they ever worked remotely? Have they ever done it before? Or again, have they ever done work that could be performed remotely? It's, in my opinion, it's less likely for someone to be hired on a new job where the employer will be saying, sure, we're going to hire you and you're going to work from your home. There are some employers who are even advertising that the job can be done remotely now. But for the most part, it's been my experience that an employer wants to see what type of employee someone is going to be. Are they a good worker? Are they reliable? Can they work with, do they need a lot of supervision or less supervision? And that's how they judge whether or not someone would be successful working remotely. So those things have to be taken into consideration. It is harder for someone to start a job that's not with an employer, that is working from home. If they're on a job and the job can be done at home, that tends to be allowed right now. I think employers are sympathetic to that and are actually looking for that themselves. Then just some basics. I mean, can they operate Zoom or WebEx or some other platform? Almost everybody can these days, but I still run into 2 cases where someone said to me, no, we've got to talk by phone. Zoom doesn't work for me. I don't know how to do it. And I had another guy who was a CEO actually of a company who said to me, nah, I hate that stuff. I still want to meet someone. And so I met with him in a conference room, reluctantly, but you know, some people just can't do it. He didn't find that it was getting in his way for the type of work that he was doing, but I think most people either need to know how to do it or they need to be taught how to do it. I think that's pretty easy to do, but it needs to be taken into consideration. So can they take a class or two, usually at the community college level, in which they can improve their IT skills? These classes are readily available at CCBC, BCCC, Howard Community College, really any community college, Anne Arundel. They all offer classes on Microsoft products. Some can be used to get a certificate, some can be used to get an associate's, but some can just be done to get somebody's skill level better. In fact, with placement being a bit more difficult during COVID, this is a perfect time for someone to be taking classes to enable them to hit the ground running when things are better. These classes aren't even offered, let me rephrase that, they're offered more often than just the start of a semester. They're usually just classes that run for 4 to 6 weeks. A person can take 1 or 2 at a time, and they can just go online and access the college's handbook and find when the classes are offered, and it can really make them far more marketable, both for a job that can be done remotely or for a job that will be done at some point in person, but they'll have better skills in which to perform that work. Next slide, please. So the vocational implications are, I think, pretty basic. What we're looking at with any individual in terms of trying to figure out their employability and their earning capacity, what they can do and what they can earn, is do they have transferable skills in an area that might be growing or in an area that might be contracting? This is true whether you're looking at COVID or not. I sometimes give an off-the-wall example of if a person is employable. Let's say, for example, there was a guy who was working in Oklahoma and he was working on oil wells, and he moves to Baltimore. He's still employable in that field, but there aren't jobs here. There aren't things that he can do. So we have to take a look at what type of things that he or she can do. And we want to look at, particularly in the time of COVID, is it a job that's growing or is it a job that's contracting? Obviously, jobs that are growing, person is more apt to find work, and the latter holds true. The opposite holds true if a job is contracting. So if their experience is in an area of contraction, how long would it take them to be retrained in a more placeable occupation? And again, placeable has to do with them and what jobs are available for them. So we want to take a look at, do they just need a couple of classes like I was describing at the community college level that might make their IT skills better? Is it someone who needs to finish a degree? They have some college, but if they could just take another few courses, they'd have a degree and then they'd become more marketable. Do they need to get a certificate in something? Do they need to get an associate's degree? You need to judge as an attorney with your client whether you think it's reasonable to look at how long the opposing party might need some remediation, some rehabilitation in order to be able to find work. We can assess, or you can work with a vocational expert who can talk about what would it take to get somebody up to work speed. Again, this is applicable whether or not COVID is going on, but more so now, because when there are fewer jobs, you need to have somebody who's more skilled and more trained. And again, even if a job can be performed remotely, is an employer going to hire them to be able to do that? If they can say, I've worked remotely in the past, an example of that would be there are claims adjusters working for insurance companies who have worked remotely for years. Some of them have, would go on site, but some of them, can just look at a picture of the damage or that sort of thing, and they've been able to adjust the claim that way. That's someone who, even working in a new job, could probably work remotely. So we have to figure out, whether, again, the person is capable of working in a job which can be done remotely for however long this is going to continue. And next slide, please. So the biggest problem is really the things that we don't know, the known unknowns. Is the pandemic going to get worse before it gets better? And I don't think anyone can give a definitive opinion on that. I suspect that it will. I mean, we're seeing that it is because the numbers are growing in terms of people who have been affected by it. My opinion is that the inverse of that is that the jobs are going to shrink. When will a vaccine be distributed effectively? We were just chit-chatting among the four of us before we started chatting with you about vaccine. And, you know, we hope that will be such that maybe things will be better in the spring. Maybe they'll be better in the summer. Maybe it'll be a year from now. You know, we just don't know how effectively the vaccine will be distributed. And so when will the job market look like it did in February 2020? We don't know for sure. We really can't say. And that is something that, because you're asking an expert to offer an opinion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty, we just can't do. You know, we can talk about, again, what the person's skill set is and what they're capable of performing and what jobs exist in the labor market now and what jobs could be available when it gets better. But when that will be, it's very difficult to say. So we really can't say for sure, you know, when we're going to have a labor market that will be zooming the way it did back before the pandemic. Next slide, please. So there are things that I think need to be acknowledged in terms of working up a case and actually in presenting testimony before the court. The pandemic and its effect on employment has to be acknowledged. We certainly you know, have to note that things are different as a result of the pandemic, that it has made the unemployment rate higher, that there are jobs that cannot be performed remotely, and that it's going to have some impact. I think the court needs to hear that. I think most judges have taken judicial notice of it themselves and just want to hear how that's being dealt with. But it's also important that the method for determining employability and earning capacity remains valid. And particularly, as Maryland is now a Daubert state as opposed to a Frye state, I know it's important for your experts to be able to present an opinion that is reliable and valid. And in taking a look at the person's work history, their educational background, their transferable skills, the length of time in which they've been looking for work and how they've been going about it, any health issues and such, there are certain questions and protocols and such that are part of a vocational assessment. And those are still done the same way. And so determining what it is that someone can do and what they can earn, that hasn't changed. And that is still should be a reliable and valid concept that your expert should be able to explain to the court. What we're looking at more than employability and earning capacity is placeability. Who's going to hire this man or this woman? You know, what skills are they bringing to the table? How are they presenting themselves so that someone is going to hire them? That's always been the case. I mean, we always have to document that there are jobs available to them. Here's where the jobs are. This is what the jobs pay. This is, you know, how often jobs are available in this person's field. But it goes to it even more now, you know, as to, you know, what is it that this person can do? And then we can really have an idea as to, is this guy going to get a job and what's he likely to get paid? And really what I have found is that what I'm adjusting more, in my opinions, is the length of time that, for a job search, that has to be adjusted. There's always a length of time in which someone's going to look for work. The person still has to make application. They have to go through the period of having interviews for a good paying job, often more than one interview. Sometimes the interviews can be done remotely. Sometimes people still have to come in for an interview. They don't always get the first job. Usually they don't get the first job. So it goes on for a while. There's always going to be a period of time, even for which a well-qualified person is looking for work. As a rule of thumb, I may have offered the opinion that someone can find work in 3 to 4 months. There are some occupations where I think it's quicker. There are some occupations where someone that's a very high wage earner would take longer. My opinion is usually expanded now. I think that it's more likely that someone is finding work in 4 to 6 months. There are some extra hoops and hurdles that someone has to step through and over in order to find employment. And again, that has to be acknowledged. So that's been the biggest change in my opinions as to what someone can do. I have testified in, I think, about 7 or 8 trials since COVID. Not all of them have been in Maryland, and in fairness, I've not testified in any in Baltimore County. I've testified in, although I'm working on Baltimore County and Howard County and Baltimore City cases. The cases in which I've testified have been in Anne Arundel and Montgomery, and I've also testified in Northern Virginia. The trials have gone well in terms that they've physically gone okay. There haven't been problems in talking to the court. I've found that the questions that have come from the judges, for those who asked them, have been similar to what I was asked prior to COVID. The feedback that I'm getting has been about the same. That by and large, the testimony has gone well. Don't hire any expert thinking you're going to bat 1,000. Sometimes judges aren't buying what we're selling, or or there are other factors that may get in the way. But I have found that testifying at trials, although unique, has not been different in terms of being results oriented than it was prior to COVID. And with that, the last slide. I thank you, and I'd be delighted to answer any of your questions.
I have a couple questions, Steve. Were emailed, if you provide vocational counseling to assist people who are trying to re-enter the job market.
Yes, I do that. I still do provide a case management service as part of what I do. Just for what it's worth, I mean, I don't charge the same rate as I do for my expert rate. It's I charge less because it's more labor intensive. I'm spending more time with the individual, but it's at a different level of skill set on my part. So yes, I would work with someone in doing career exploration, developing a resume, helping them in finding employment. Depending on the type of work that they're suited for, I might contact employers myself. If the person is on a professional level, I would not do that. I'm not going to call a law firm and see if they're hiring lawyers. I'm not going to call a hospital and see if they're hiring nurses. But I would be able to help the person figure out what they need to do and how they would go about accessing that, practicing interviewing skills with them, that sort of thing, and following up. So yes, that would be a skill that I could offer, and I would expect that other vocational rehabilitation counselors in the area would do the same.
The other question is, if someone has come to you and they had been working in the service industry, and your opinion is, they're not going to be able to get back into that full time for a while, and it may be part-time and then a slow build, but your opinion could also be, but if they switched industries and maybe did some training first, they may be able to get back to that full-time self-supporting point sooner, rather than wait for their traditional experience to get them back to that point. Have judges been receptive to that, of kind of someone doing a 180 of, this is totally new to this person, but it'll just kind of get you where you want to be faster?
I think it depends on the level of education that the person has coming in. And even that depends on how long it's been since they've done it. I'm working on a case right now where somebody has a graduate degree, but they got the graduate degree in the early 2000s and they never worked in that field. They got the graduate degree while they were a stay-at-home parent and continued being a stay-at-home parent until now. And that person probably will need some remediation in order to go back to work, because the skills that they learned from their work experience, undergraduate degree and graduate degree, are not really applicable right now. So yes, I do find that judges are, tend to be receptive to that. I quite frankly, I approach it really by talking with the attorney about it and seeing, what it is that helps their case. I don't let it change my mind as to what someone can do, but I want to know what it is that they need. In a perfect world, if I was just working with someone in a case management setting, we'd figure out what they want to do and how they get there, and can they do it with direct placement, or do they need to be retrained? But in the case of family law, maybe the other side doesn't want to pay for 4 years, for the person to be going to school and having to retrain. So I really want to look at, can they do it in a discrete period of time? I also want to look at it can they do it on a full-time basis? For the most part, if someone's not working, they really should be able to go to school full-time, even during the summers now. It's not like they were a kid and they were in college and they took summers off. If the classes are available, the person should be treating education like a full-time job and should be able to complete it as quickly as possible. So I like to take a look at how they can do that so they can hit the labor market as quickly as possible. The other thing I want to look at is the person's age, and I believe that the judges look at that as well. If someone is 57 years old, they probably shouldn't be going through a 3 or 4 year program. If someone is 27 years old, then that might be appropriate, that they be going for a longer period of time, because at the end of that, they'll be far more qualified in which they're able to work and to earn. In the scenario that you just asked me about, Elena, where someone's in a service industry, I would think that the training probably wouldn't be that involved, and probably could be done relatively quickly. And I would expect that if it's going to make a big difference in what someone could earn, that ideally would be a win-win situation for both sides. But again, that'd be something I would discuss with the referring attorney.
Would you ever take into account the person's, own comfort level or risk aversion, if that's the right phrase to use, with COVID? If they're nervous about getting back into whatever field that may be, is that something that you may consider when giving your opinion?
Yes, more so now than I would in the past. I mean, to some degree, that's something you always have to listen to. I mean, there's somebody who might say, listen, I always worked in the back. I was a bookkeeper because I don't like working with people. I'm not good with people. And this is who I am. And I think that everybody has different personalities, and you really have to respect, what they've been like. And if someone has a legitimate concern, I just can't see myself doing that. I think that that's something that does have to be listened to. It has to be given some respect. Something else actually that occurred to me is that I typically do not pay attention to a level of childcare that somebody is providing regarding my opinions. I recognize that the court might give that consideration, but I just try and take a look at what someone is capable of doing, and then let them talk to the court about why they feel they should be able to do it or not. I'm revising that a little bit. If a parent is home and they have 2 or 3 children, and the kids are maybe in elementary school or middle school, and they're learning at home and they really can't be left alone, someone's got to be with them, I think that has to be taken into consideration. And if a person is saying to me, I can't leave my kids, it's not like they're in school. It's not someone who's saying, oh, I need to be home, when they get home from school so I can give them cocoa and cookies. It's someone who's saying, which I do hear, by the way, it's someone who's saying, I can't leave them. My kids are 12, 9, and 7, and they need to have someone around. They don't always know how to get on the computer, or they need someone to prepare lunch for them. I think that has to be taken into consideration. So I do think that there are unique considerations right now regarding the pandemic, regarding COVID, that do have to be acknowledged. I'm sure the court will. And I think that for me to be a credible witness, I need to acknowledge that too.
Wendy, did you have any questions that had popped up or were emailed to you?
Yeah, the only question that I saw in the question and answer bar, and I think I'm asking this question correctly. So do you ever see the circumstance where when someone's trying to figure out if someone working from home would be a good fit, like if that would work, do you ever see the circumstance where that the employers test that out? Like, because like, for example, like if they know that person in the work environment is a very good worker and strong worker and gets their work done, I think you said they kind of have a better checkbox there for being able to do the same thing at home. Have you ever seen a solution, a place where I guess employers or potential employers are doing interviews measuring that? I think I'm phrasing the question.
Sure. No, I think I understand the question. I don't really know how that would be measurable. You know, that might be something that would be a new interviewing skill that I would discuss with someone. Look, you know, this job is going to need to be done from home, and you need to convince this employer, or we don't know if it can be done from home, but you need to convince an employer that you're capable of doing that. And that if you can talk to the employer about what you've done on past jobs, what your productivity was like, why you're always there every day and on time, and that you don't have things that are interfering at home with your ability to perform your work. You know, maybe there's a setting where your kids are older, or they're not going to be needing you as much, and you're just going to be able to do your job. To convey that at the interview so that you can say, I can do this job, I could do it from home. You know, would you please consider utilizing me in that way? I think that that's something that would come up. I've not run into that because by and large, I'm not running into the interview process. You know, I'm to the point of offering my opinions, and then the case goes where it goes. I do offer to everybody, whether I'm on their side or the other side, that when the case resolves, that I would be willing to work with them and help them out. Some people do avail themselves of that with me, but most don't.
Let's see, any other questions, do you, Wen? Okay, so if there are no other questions, then I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Today's session was recorded, so within 48 hours, this will actually be available on the BCBA's YouTube channel, and we will email a copy of Steve's PowerPoint presentation to all the participants today, so you have that for your records as well. And I just want to take the opportunity again to thank you, Steve, for putting together a really informative presentation for us, really timely, and I appreciate it very much. I know everyone else, even though you can't see everyone and hear everyone, appreciates it as well. And usually there'll be applause for you and everything right now, so we'll just imagine it. And hopefully we'll be able to see each other again very soon. Hope everyone takes care, stays healthy, and thank you again very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.